Hi there. If you want me to read a story, make sure to post it on my Discord. The link is in the description. Behind closed doors. Being a locksmith usually isn't as simple as getting people's keys out of their cars. Nothing can prepare you for what you can see. For example, a tenant hasn't been paying the rent for months in a seedy apartment building. Odds are, when you finally get the door open, you'll find a rotting body. I've had to open thousands of locks on thousands of different things, from a tiny one on the diary of a daughter of a rich family to the industrial ones they use in garages. Despite the differences, many jobs require the same tools. I almost always think of quality before I even begin to consider the quantity. This came back to bite me when I answered a call really late one night, only about 15 minutes before closing. I opened with the customary customer greeting, only to be rudely cut off by a strange, shaky voice. "All the doors in my house have been locked. I need you to come unlock them." Now, usually I would continue from the greeting by asking them what was troubling them, but this guy seemed to want to get straight to the point. I balked almost instantly. "Sir, what do you mean all the doors in your house have been locked?" His voice was impatient. "I've been sitting in my living room for hours. I came home and all the doors in my house were locked from the inside. I tried to get some of them open, but I couldn't. Can you just come here, please?" I sighed. If this guy had managed to do what he said, I was looking at an hours-long job. Since it was very close to closing, I almost told him to call back in the morning before I thought about the money. Since the call had come in on such short notice, I figured I could charge him more and maybe get a little extra money in my paycheck later in the month. "I think I can manage that, sir. Where do you live?" After I had gotten all his details, he said one final thing before he hung up. "Please don't look inside the rooms unless absolutely necessary." On my drive over there, I considered the fact that I might be dealing with some kind of whack job. For all I knew, it could have been a setup so he could rob me or something. But since the house was only 10 minutes from the offices, I decided to muscle through. When I pulled into the driveway, I realized the man had not exactly been truthful. He didn't live in a house. It looked more like a mansion. 3 stories, gabled roof, and more windows than I could count. The entire place was dark except for one light on near the lower right-hand corner. I assumed this was the living room the man had mentioned. Well, at least it'll pay well. After getting my kit ready, I walked up the drive and knocked on the door. As if he had been waiting for me, I barely had time to put my hand down before it swung open to reveal a pretty shifty-looking old dude with slicked back hair and a John Waters mustache. "First door, it's right up those stairs. Please make it quick." He barely looked in my direction before he slipped back through the archway that led to the living room. Cursing the impoliteness of my customer, I snapped on the light and headed up the stairs. Once I reached the top, my mouth almost fell open. Every piece of available wall had a door on it. Most of them were not even the same plain white interior ones that regular houses have. I saw heavy oak ones with brass fittings, kitchen doors with round portholes in them, glass patio doors, and ornate redwood ones that looked like they belonged in a dojo or something. I tried every last handle. They were all locked. Setting my kit down, I began to work. The door had an Art Deco feel about it. The knobs were polished brass and strangely warm, as if someone had been holding a torch to it. This struck me as odd, but I wrote it off. Slipping the tension rod in first, then the pick, I began to work. I hummed softly to myself as I worked, easing each piece into place, nudging and prodding. I wondered to myself why this guy didn't have keys to his rooms, but I've seen some weird people in this job. Any luck? I jumped, dropping the pick on the carpet. I pressed my lips together and rolled my eyes, and turned to the customers smiling. I just got to work. I picked up the pick, shaking off a shutter. I could feel the man's eyes on my neck as I worked. So, where's the keys to these doors? I asked, keeping my tone casual. No one answered. I turned, and the man was gone. Blowing out air slowly, I turned back and began to work again. After a few moments, I heard something across the hall. I turned and squinted. The hall light was quite dim, so whatever was under the door, I couldn't quite see. It sounded like a small animal digging into the carpet. "Hey, you got a dog?" I called out, already moving my tools over. I wasn't going to make an animal, whether it was a cat or a dog, stay stuck in a room. I knew a lady who kept her ferrets in their own room, and those things stunk up the whole house. She had been a hoarder too. Once I had unlocked the door, she tried to pay me with a few baby ferrets. I declined. Once I got to the door, the digging stopped. "Don't worry, little guy," I said, in a soothing voice as I slid the tension rod in once again. "I've got you. I'll let you out." I worked the pick, listening for clicks. This particular door wasn't as elaborate as the other one. It was kind of worn out, and the bottom looked as if something had been chewing at it. Something poked my knee. I looked down, and there was nothing there. I shifted on my knees and continued working. The animal must have reached under the door and tested to see if I was going to play with it. I shrugged it off. The lock was easier than expected. The knob turned, and I opened the door a little. "Come out," I said gently. There was a sound like a sharp exhale of breath, and the door slammed shut. I fell backwards, dropping the tension rod and kicking it under the door. "Fuck," I swore. "Shit." I tried the knob again, and it was unlocked, but it wasn't budging. "Sir," I called down the stairs. "I got one open, but I dropped a tool, and now the door won't open." No answer. I blew out my breath again, frustrated. Luckily, I had extras. I grabbed my bag and moved to the next door. It was a sliding glass door that you might find going into a backyard. The inside was pitch black. No light illuminated the floor on the inside. It took me a moment to realize the glass was blacked out. No matter. This door would be easy. I slid the device in, and everything just fit in smoothly, except something was off. It felt like I was poking jelly, and with a satisfying plop, the door unlocked. It slowly slid, permitting a small opening where black goo came pouring out. What the fuck? I scrambled to my feet and closed the door shut, pressing the black goo in the process. I quickly picked up my stuff and contemplated if I really had to finish this job, but the thought of losing money won me over. I turned to the next door I'm about to do. This one is simple. Red door with a shiny golden doorknob. But what is different is that there seems to be someone inside watching the TV.
Can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street?
I didn't really assume it was a child trapped in there at first. I softly knocked on the door. "Hey, is someone in there?" I asked. There was no response, as the doorknob suddenly turned and the door unlocked on its own. Sometimes I'm not good at following customer requests. I opened the door and went inside. It was dark, with only a single lampshade on. The room is your usual child's bedroom, with those glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. There isn't much, just a television on, a bed with pink sheets, and a single portrait of a child wearing a blue, lacy dress.
Why are you here?
I looked away from the portrait and stared at Elmo on the TV.
Why are you here?
It asked again. I jumped. Fuck. It was a whisper in my ear. I stared at the portrait on the wall and noticed a tight-lipped grin on the child's face. I started backing away, with her eyes watching every inch that I make away from this room, away from this dread that is slowly consuming my skin. The doorknob is just behind me. Without breaking eye contact, I reached out, and a scream from the television nearly deafened me. The eerily perfect portrait's paint melted off and quickly dripped away from the frame, making its way to me, revealing the horror underneath. It was still the child, but with eyes dripping out from its sockets and bluish skin. I opened the door with one swift motion before the oil paint reached me and slammed it shut. I cursed myself for heeding the silent invitation when the door opened, up until another child's whispers resonated in the hallway. That brought me back to my senses, only to realize that I wasn't in the same hallway that I was before. Instead of doors covering almost all of the walls, portraits of different children had replaced them, with my bag nowhere in sight. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, echoing down the hall. "Hello," I called out, only to hear a cacophony of giggles bounce off the walls in response. I couldn't see the end of the hallway, but hoping I'd find a door, I started walking past the portraits. Eyes followed my movements. Unintelligible whispers made my steps a little faster. Everything in me wanted to run, but I feared it would cause the paintings to follow me, as the other one had done. Because it didn't matter how quickly I moved, I heard the now familiar sound of paint oozing to the floor behind me. I tried to ignore it, to keep focused on making it to an end that I wasn't even sure was there, but I had to. I would glance back. The paint, goo, whatever the hell you want to call it, it was amassing into a river of blackness as it trailed my steps, and it was quickly gaining. The voices repeated like a broken record, spoken by many, many voices and increasing in volume until all I could hear was screaming, loud enough to make my ears bleed. I was running at this point, barreling forward to escape the horror behind me. When I finally saw the end of the hallway, I realized with pure dread there was no door. There was no painting either. Instead, there was a very, very large, beautifully decorated mirror covering the wall from floor to ceiling. As I neared it, I could see the hollow eyes and pale blue skin of countless children before me. They were all smiling with small, rotted, blackened teeth, surrounded by decaying lips and bloated cheeks. Their arms were outstretched, the pudgy little hands of adolescents capped with wicked-looking talons on each fingertip. As I closed in on the mirror, the mouths began to shift from tainted smiles of happy children to wide-mouthed screams, their maws outstretched to gaping black holes in a chorus of terror. I touched the cool, hard glass and spun around, heart pounding with terror and exertion, totally unprepared to meet my fate. There was no one there. The hall stretched out before me, empty and still. Quiet surrounded me, and I released a shaky breath of relief. A child's voice whispered chillingly directly into my ear before the weight of many freezing, unseen bodies and slicing claws fell upon me. I could not stop the screams that escaped me as I felt myself be gripped tightly and jerked backwards, hard. I've never been one to cry tears, but tears flowed down my face and cheeks as I fought against the hands that gripped me, pleading through choked wails. It took me a moment to realize that I felt another pair of hands, and they were warm. When I opened my eyes, I saw the owner of the house. He had pulled me through the mirror. When I glanced up towards the wall, I saw an identical mirror, reflecting the doors lining the hall behind me. I moved away from that fucking thing as quickly as I could, fearing the reappearance of the children inside it, or worse, them coming through it. Looking back, I saw the old man on his feet, breathing heavily but otherwise unscathed. He leaned down, set my toolkit at my feet, turned, and began to walk away. "Oh, no you don't. What the fuck was that?" I yelled. "You can't walk away like that. You didn't just pull me through a fucking mirror to escape murderous dead children, old man. Answer me." He paused, half turned in my direction, still barely looking at me, and spoke quietly. "I told you not to open the doors. I need them unlocked but unopened, and I don't have time to call someone else." I opened my mouth to tell him off, to say that the money he was offering wasn't worth shit, and I was leaving, but he cut me off. "I'll triple your pay in cash to complete this tonight. Find me in the foyer when you're done." And then he was gone, as quickly and quietly as he had appeared before. I stared at my toolkit absent-mindedly as I tried to reconcile what had just happened. Unable to make sense of it, I pushed it to the back of my mind. This house was not right, and that was clear. I didn't want to be here, but I had no choice. Tripled in cash and tax-free. Call me crazy, but that money was worth it. I know it was, and I'm definitely going to need therapy after. I decided to keep going, a decision that was obviously a mistake that nearly cost me everything. Grabbing my toolkit, I got back to work on the doors. Ignoring any further sounds and images, I quickly and efficiently unlocked all the doors. I resisted the compulsion to open them, though a few times I found myself unconsciously turning the handles before I regained my grip on reality. Once I'd even managed to start pushing a door open, but I caught myself, swiftly pulling it back towards me and finding comfort in the quiet click of the mechanism latching. The hours passed achingly slow, though I was working as fast as I could until I reached the last door. Well, it was actually a set of doors, large and imposing, like those at the entry of a castle hall. Wrought iron met at the center of the closed panels to form a secondary barricade from the outside. At the top and the bottom of the doors, the archway was surrounded by gray, time-worn stone that appeared to have symbols etched onto them. The dark wood of the doors themselves also had markings carved into them from the top to the bottom, as well as writing scrolled across the top in a language unknown to me. It emanated a foreboding aura, like a warning against the evil this room contained. Swallowing hard against the dryness that had claimed my throat, I set to work on the ancient keyhole embedded in the door. With one final click, I heard the lock disengage. Quickly, I turned to grab my bag, not even bothering to put my tools away, when I heard the groaning wood and creaking hinges of the doors opening behind me. Holding my breath, I slowly turned to find a room of old, straight out of a medieval scene, faintly lit by torches lining the walls. I went against every instinct as I walked into the room. I thought it was empty at first. I spent the first few minutes looking around at the old oil portraits and shuddered when I saw most of the subjects were children. I was just turning to leave when suddenly a voice stopped me in my tracks.
Ugly things, aren't they?
I whipped my head around, only to be greeted by a transparent girl sitting in a wooden chair. Her outlines were there, but she was see-through. You could see the cushions she was sitting on. She smiled at me.
You don't really have to worry about them. They're all bark, no bite.
What are they? She stood up and lightly stepped across the room.
They were children once. Bad ones. The old man downstairs certainly has a knack for finding them.
She paused for a moment, as if expecting a question. When I didn't reply, she continued.
He's been doing this for centuries now. He finds them and spirits them away, traps their souls in replicas of rooms they so often terrorized. Most of the times they're quiet, stewing away in their own personal prison, but sometimes they get angry enough to lock all the doors.
She looked down at my toolkit.
You're not the first locksmith we've had.
I blinked. So, does that mean you're bad too? The girl laughed.
Look around the room. Do you notice anything?
My eyes scanned the area, looking for something out of place. I noticed an overturned chair at the end of the long wooden table. Stepping across the corner, I saw the girl, only this time in reality. Her eyes were closed, and there was a gaping wound on her head leaking blood onto the stones.
That was me. Portia didn't want to share her dessert with me, so she gave me a shove and I hit the edge of the table. The rest is history.
Does that mean you're trapped too? She laughed again.
I'm not that girl anymore. I'm merely a copy of her spirit. Her real spirit is up there.
She pointed up to the sky. Suddenly the room began to shake. The girl frowned.
Portia will be here any minute now. The souls contained here may not be able to hurt you physically, but they can take quite a toll on your mental health.
Nodding, I grabbed my toolkit and ran for the door. Right before it closed, the girl said one final thing to me.
I wouldn't come back to this house if I were you.
I walked back down the hallway, past the myriad of doors. The old man waited at the bottom of the stairs with a checkbook in his hand. "You didn't open any of the doors, did you?" he asked, giving me a side eye. "No, sir." He nodded, and he wrote out triple the usual fee on the check. I slipped it into my pocket and headed for the door. Right as I was about to turn the handle, I turned back, and I asked him, "Sir, how many doors are in this house?" He looked at me sullenly. "Way more than you think." I could tell he knew I lied earlier. "I think I'll be using a different service from now on." I stepped out. "That's a good idea, sir. Good night." And as I walked to my car, I thought I heard the sounds of doors closing somewhere behind me.